Good evening, everyone. I am CA Vikas Gupta, and I welcome you all to yet another webinar on global trends in internal audit, a look ahead, organized by our Internal Audit Standard Board (ICI). Today, we have with us CA Uzifa Ungwala, CA Ankur Gupta, and CA Prakash Kulkarni ji, who would be sharing their knowledge on various standards of internal audit, followed by a Q&A session. First of all, I would like to welcome CA Samir Singla ji, who is the chairman, Bathinda branch of NIRC, for his opening remarks. Welcome, Samir, sir.
Well, thank you, CA Vikas Gupta ji. First of all, a very good evening to each and everyone over here. I would first like to thank the Internal Audit Standard Board of ICI for giving Bathinda branch the opportunity to host this virtual credit meet on a very hot topic of recent time, that is the global trends in internal audit. A look ahead. I would like to thank CA Charanjot Singh Nandaji, the chairman of this committee, a man of wisdom and a true brand ambassador of ICI, I must say. We are fortunate that a person like Sri Charanjot Singh Nandaji is with us on these matters. I would further thank and welcome Sri Gyanchang Mishra ji, the vice chairman of this committee. I welcome our keynote speakers for the day, Sri Huzefa and Walaji, Sri Ankur Gupta ji, and Sri Prakash Kulkarni ji. And I thank them that they spared their valuable time for all of us today to enlighten us on the today's topic. And it is our privilege that we've got such wonderful faculties with us. A stitch in time saves nine, and internal audit fall in these categories. Internal audit is not only an independent service to evaluate organizational internal controls, corporate practices, processes, and methods, but this offers a comprehensive preventive measure for timely pointing the pitfall so that the proactive steps can be taken. Today, we are having an in-depth deliberation on the topics of Standard of Internal Audit 7, that is Quality Assurance in Internal Audit, SIA 230, Objectives of Internal Audit, SIA 240, Using the Work of an Expert, and Internal Audit of Procurement Function in the Era of Digitalization by our learned speakers. So without taking any much further time, I would like to hand over it to C. Vikas ji and again thank the committee for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samir, sir. Now, I would like to welcome CA Charanjot Singh Nanda, who is the chairman, Internal Audit Standard Board (ICI), for his welcome address and keynote session. But before that, I would like to read his brief profile in front of all of you. So, Nanda sir is currently a Central Council member of the 25th Council of ICI. He is the Vice Chairman of the Banking, Financial Service and Insurance Committee, who is the member Quality Review Board. He was the Central Council member for 12 years from 2004 to 2016. He was the chairman of Committee on Internal Audit and also the chairman of Committee for Members in Industry for ICI. He was the chairman of Women Members Empowerment Committee, vice chairman of Committee on Public Finance and Government Accounting, chairman of Professional Development Committee, Committee for Cooperatives and NPO sectors, vice chairman of Research Committee, chairman of Committee on Banking, Insurance and Pensions, chairman of Committee on Financial Markets and Investors Protection. Sir has represented ICI on SEBI Committee on Disclosures and Accounting Standards. He was a convener of the expert group constituted by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India on investor protection. He was a member of Southern Asia Federation of Accountants Committee on Professional Accountants in Business. He was the chairman of the Continuing Professional Education Committee, Public Relations Committee, and Committee on Internal Board of ICI. Welcome, Nanda sir.
Thanks a lot, Vikas ji. My salutations to the chairman of Bathinda branch, C.S. Samir Singla, my very dear friend and ever faculty of the day, who will be taking the first session, Mr. Josefa Onawala and Mr. Ankur Gupta and Mr. Prakash Kulkarni and Sanshya, and all who have come here to go home or related. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a flight to catch, but I wanted to come and speak to you for a second. I want to tell you all that times have become more exciting. The profession is looking at new horizons, and internal audit is always a sunrise area. So we have to hold programs. I am at your beck and call. Whenever you want, we can have a program. And I want to tell you one thing very candidly, that we at the board are very serious to hold programs on different areas, which will ultimately help you upscale your professional skills and, more importantly, your endeavors of new age profession. Not taking much of a time, I want to thank you all. I'm standing outside the Chandigarh airport. I have a flight to catch at 6:50. So thank you all for coming here. Thank you, Samir ji, for hosting this program, Bathinda branch. Thank you, Josefa bhai, Vikas ji, and the entire Inter Standard Board. Chalo ji. We have very important thing to take things across in the right esteem. The profession is great, and we are very keen to serve this great profession and make you understand all nuances of this great discipline, internal audit. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. So now we begin with our first technical session of the evening. The topic is Standard on Internal Audit 7, Quality Assurance in Internal Audit by CA Huzifa Unwala. Welcome, Huzifa, sir. So I would like to read a brief profile before we start. So sir is a senior partner at the firm and founder of JHS and Associates LLP. Sir is on the board of Dixon Asia Pacific as a non-executive director. He serves an expert member on the technology committee of a leading asset management company. He has over 23 years of composite experience in serving international, large and mid-sized clients in the area of management consultancy, business advisory, fraud investigations, internal audit, IT advisory, SOX, IFC implementation assistance, and enterprise-wise risk management. Sir has played leadership role in his career, mentoring large teams, serving global clients, and developing practice innovations. Sir has made several notable contributions to professional bodies like ICI, IIA, BCAS, ISACA, CII, Indian Audits and Accounts, CAG, IBIIN, and other professional firms. So, welcome without taking much time. I welcome CA Huzifa, sir, for enlightening us with his knowledge. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Vikas ji. I hope my voice is audible.
Yes, sir, it is clear.
My greetings to Nanda ji, first of all, and thanking him and IASB for having invited me today again to this thematic on global trends in internal auditing, which is a very exciting format introduced by Nanda ji and the Internal Audit Standards Board to deliberate on number of contemporary issues. So thank you, Nandaji, and the IASB as well as Samir Singla ji for inviting me to the Bathinda branch. This is the first time I am with your branch, and very exciting to be with you all today evening. And I'm going to deliberate on a topic which is, I would say, always a seasonal flavor with the Indian media as far as audit quality is concerned and quality assurance is concerned. We have already seen so many headlines in the last week itself, where the institute has established inquiries almost against 200 chartered accountants for a number of matters pertaining to the Chinese applications, app-based companies that are running and doing a lot of illegitimate activities in India. So I would say that this is a very, very serious matter, audit quality and quality assurance. And fortunately, we have with us, institute, our alma mater, who is always ahead of time, has created standards, has given us certain frameworks that are cast in gold. And today, the standard which we will deliberate, quality assurance, standard, SIA standard 7, is a gem of a standard actually for anybody who's very keen to start a practice in internal audit, or is a practitioner of internal audit, or is a perhaps a partner in a firm having a large portfolio of internal audit clients, or is a internal audit head in a corporate or in an industry. So to all of these individuals, this standard applies, and it's a very important standard. So we will deliberate on the practicalities of implementation of the standards. I will start sharing my slides as well in a second. Just give me a minute. I'll share the screen with you all. So here it is. I hope my screen is visible to you all.
Yes, it is, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas. So thanks for the confirmation. The slides that I've prepared are a combination of material that comes out of the standard on internal audit published by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, some good learnings coming out of some global bodies as well, and general references available from the public sources. What I will be covering today in our deliberations is the scope and objectives of the standard, the implementation framework that has been given in the standard as far as the subject of quality assurance and continuous improvement is concerned of internal audit activities. Then we will deliberate on what are the practical challenges in actually implementing, putting in place a quality assurance framework, considering in mind the ground level challenges that internal auditors face. Internal auditors' job, it's always batting on a very tricky pitch. It's not a simple job because in India, the internal audit profession is still evolving. It is not matured as the statutory audit profession. Management sometimes fails to understand the value that the internal auditors bring to the table. Internal auditors themselves wear multiple hats, whether it is related to internal financial control related testing work, standard operating procedure development work. So there is some kind of a flux between what is expected as far as the regulatory bodies, the Companies Act, and the prescribed role of the internal auditors is concerned, including the standards in internal audit, vis-a-vis what sometimes the internal auditors end up doing. So standards on internal audit give us very clear scope and boundaries as to what we should do, what we should not do, how we should do, and what are the benchmarks and what are the scales on which we can perform an internal audit satisfactorily and at the end of the day add value to the clients. So quality assurance in internal audit is a standard which is dealing with the subject of quality. Now, auditing itself is a complex subject, and to overlay that with a subject of quality, it becomes little more complicated in terms of applying professional judgment, the skills that the internal auditor has to apply. But the sun and substance of the standard is that how an internal auditor can establish a framework of performing internal audit and doing a continuous review of his own work so that he can benchmark his own work with a standard on quality assurance and then confidently tell to the management that whatever he has performed and whatever results have been delivered to the board, to the audit committee, are in line with the quality assurance prescription standards and the golden rules laid down by SIA 7. So we'll deliberate on the key objectives, scope, what is there in the standard, the implementation framework, and the practical challenges. So what are the key objectives of SIA 7? The key objectives of SIA 7, number one is to establish a system for assuring quality in internal audit activities. Now, what do we do in internal audit activities? In internal audit activities, we generally look at the entire risk universe of the organization. The risk universe would comprise of the financial statements, the statutory compliance is applicable to order to cash cycle, hire to exit cycles, procure to pay cycles, and number of other business cycles and business units that we would take up in the internal audit activities. So one of the key objectives here of the SIA 7 is that how does an internal auditor assure from a quality standpoint that whatever work he has delivered can be benchmarked with a set criteria, with a performance criteria, with a system criteria. So it is like the auditors being audited. So when we prepare a subject matter checklist for the purpose of executing an internal audit, the checklist becomes a criteria for us to audit. Likewise, the SIA 7 requires that all internal audit activities, the framework of internal audit that is being executed should have a criteria, should have a checklist, should have a quality benchmark defined so that the internal auditor's work can be measured against a set standard. So it's like creation of an internal audit quality manual or an internal audit manual of procedures, protocols, policies, etc., a system that an internal auditor can use and can deploy in the day-to-day internal auditing activity that he or she executes in the firm for clients or in the industry as a corporate function. So the foremost objective of the standard is to establish a framework, a manual, a policy and procedure document on how internal audit work will be performed in the organization. which will include the internal audit budgeting system, the internal audit resourcing model, the internal audit plans, the risk and control matrices, the checklists, the testing plans, etc. The entire gamut of internal audit activities, how it will be performed has to be documented and available as a quality manual. So that is one of the critical objectives of the standard. The second most important objective of the standard is that, once having established the system, it should ensure that all the regulatory requirements, statutory requirements that are entrusted to the internal audit function are being met appropriately or no, should be verified independently by a quality professional, by a person who's dedicatedly appointed as a quality supervisor, quality checker, quality controller, or quality owner, who's independent of the internal audit function. So the second objective is to entrust the quality responsibilities to a separate line function who's independent of internal audit activities and is able to cross-question and audit what the internal audit function has performed. So whether the internal audit function has performed as per the internal audit manual, quality procedures, processes or no, because we are the ones who are doing the internal audit activities on a day-to-day basis. And we ourselves cannot conclude that we have performed our functions appropriately and suitably well. So just like how we have a peer reviewer as far as statutory audit function is concerned, the institute and SEBI appointed peer reviewers come to our office, review our work once in 3 years, depending on the size of the practice unit, the grade of the practice unit. The standard here requires an independent quality assurer. Now, this independent quality assurer can be internal or can be external. We will deliberate on that as well in the next slides. So the independent quality single point of contact or the quality process owner in the organization for internal audit activities is responsible for reviewing certain critical activities as far as the objectives are concerned, the leadership responsibilities for quality as far as IA activities are concerned, who's signing off the report on internal audit, whether he's conflicted, whether he's independent or not, while he's signing off the responsibilities, whether the internal audit function is competent or not, and so forth. So like that, the quality process owner has to lay down certain frameworks for review of the quality of the internal audit matters of the organization. So there are 3 specific objectives laid down. First one is a documented system for quality assurance of internal audit activities in the form of a manual. Second is a ownership responsibility should be independent of the internal audit function, entrusted to a individual who's an experienced individual in internal audit activities. And third is his ability to review the leadership roles in internal audit and several other criteria. We'll come to the detailed checklist also for quality assurance, which is not recommended in the SIA, but the SIA 7 lays down several criteria on the basis of which a quality assurance function can be established to review the internal audit activities. What are the various components as far as the SIA 7 are concerned for quality assurance? So there are 7 or 8 key components. The first component that the SIA defines is that the internal audit function should establish and develop a manual, a policy and procedure for executing good quality internal audits. Now, this is very, very important. Like when we do any internal audit work, we come out with an audit observation. So in the audit observation, we may come out that, there is non-compliance with section so-and-so of the Companies Act, or there is non-compliance with section so-and-so of the Income Tax Act, or the rules of the Income Tax Act. And we then make a recommendation against that. So there is quantification of criteria. So the standard here also wants that the internal auditors, when they recommend specific quantified criteria in the internal audit reports, likewise, they should establish manuals, policies, and procedures themselves. So when the quality assurance is done on their work, there is a benchmark for the quality assurance or the quality reviewer to look at the manuals and then comment upon the quality of the work. So for example, the internal audit policy can very well have a statement that all the internal audit working papers will be stored and retained for a period of 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending on the organizational philosophy, client requirements, regulatory requirements. In absence of such a policy, there will be an interpretation issue. Maybe new joiners who are not aware of the organizational philosophy may end up destroying internal audit working papers and so forth. So it is important to establish good quality manuals, policies, and procedures as part of the internal audit function is concerned. So quality assurance can be done in a comprehensive manner. Even for example, the number of hours and the number of man days that a particular person will work in a year on internal audit activities. There could be a policy statement around that. That could be a procedure around that. Rotation of responsibilities. Then the internal audit budget for the entire year. How it will be formulated. What will be there in the budget. What are the type of resources required for internal audit activity. All this should be listed in the components of quality assurance so that the quality assurance can be done in a comprehensive manner. Voice of customers is very, very important, and SIA 7 recognizes that almost 3 to 4 places they have mentioned that customer feedback or the people who are consuming internal audit activities and reports and internal audit communication are the ones who are the customers. Now, who are the customers? There could be audit committee members, board of directors, CFO, CEO, or the process owners who are being audited. These are the customers and stakeholders of internal audit, and the standard requires that as part of the quality assurance function, customer feedback should be taken and there should be a process for continuous improvement. This is a great prescription in the standard. It really helps improve internal audit activities on a continuous basis because internal auditors can go wrong. They rely on economic information, business information, system generated information, and they formulate their opinions and points of view. But it is quite possible that they may go factually wrong if the information is incorrect. So seeking feedback, timely feedback, and also organized feedback post internal audit activity, documenting that and showing a continuous improvement trend in the internal audit activity is what SIA 7 would like internal auditors to establish and like to do. Monitoring updations of IA plans and budgets on a regular basis, acquisition and deployment of audit tools, staffing related matters like knowledge, competence, training, and hiring is something that the standard talks about from a quality assurance perspective, which the internal auditor should ensure. As far as customer feedback, voice of customers are concerned, in several peer review exercises, several quality review exercises that I have undertaken in the past, I have taken feedback and I have generally got such feedback that internal auditors may not have domain knowledge about the industry or the sector, or internal auditors may be too junior to even interact with the management at the higher level, or internal auditors don't use state-of-the-art technology tools available to analyze data in an effective manner. So this is the kind of feedback that we generally get. And if we work on this feedback, it will help us improve our fee levels also tremendously. We can add a lot of value as far as our internal audit output is concerned. We can charge our clients more also. And they will see the transformation in our auditing activity. Also, the standard talks about establishing a performance metrics and a performance criteria. Now, this is something again which is very complex. Internal audit or audit for that matter as a function is complex. We rely on a set of information, data, explanations, basis that we form a professional judgment. And if we have to create a performance benchmark for that, it's like auditing the doctor. Once the doctor has prescribed the medicine, someone else coming in and saying that the medicine is correct or it's not correct. Now the doctor has used his professional judgment in arriving at an opinion or conclusion on any particular matter, which is driven by circumstances, driven by the client, driven by a particular day, situation, information at hand, and then you formulating a view, and then someone else from your quality team coming up and saying that, hey, you could have looked at this particular aspect, or maybe you missed out looking at this interpretation in law, or maybe you have interpreted something incorrectly. Now, let me give you a practical example here. It could be on related party transactions. There is a standard on internal audit on related party transactions. Now, we all know that when there are financial related party transactions, we have a good benchmark. There is an arm's length criteria available in the industry. We can get quotations. We can see what are the arm's length pricing models. We can compare. We can reach conclusions. But where there is a barter-like model, where two related parties, one is a TV channel, one is a newspaper, they are bartering their time, they are bartering their space. There is no arm's length kind of a situation on which, on a particular day, an auditor or an internal auditor may have reached a subjective judgment. So it could be practically challenging when you do a quality assurance on audit or internal audit function because it involves reviewing the judgment of the auditor on a particular circumstance, a particular situation. So it has got its own set of nuances. So what will be very useful for internal auditors who are doing internal audit activities day in, day out is that when they reach their professional opinions and judgments, they document the reasons why they have reached a particular judgment or why they have made a particular prescription to the client. And the reason should be good enough. The reason should be benchmarked with law. Reason should have coherent interpretations and qualitative assessments, feedback from the client, etc. Everything. So we have to be very wary of that. So the quality assurance standard does require that we establish a performance metrics, a performance criteria for the internal audit activities. We look at the scale also. I have put in certain recommendations here that as far as quality assurance are concerned, what are the various criteria we can put in place for verifying our own work and independently by somebody else as well. So let's look at the broad framework first, that if we have to put in place a quality assurance program, then the quality assurance program in internal audit activity should comprise of what all components and what all aspects. First is the governance and structure of the internal audit function, how the internal audit function is being managed. Second is the internal audit strategy and the annual planning and the various quarterly plans that the internal auditors come up with. Third is the level of knowledge, skills, competence that the internal auditor has in the form of qualifications, experience, diversity in the internal audit activities. Then the work products like risk and control matrices, checklists, dashboards, data analysis that the internal auditor does, and the kind of communication that the internal auditor comes out with. Is it opinion? Is it a rating report, high, medium, low risk rated report? Is it a specific audit opinion report? Again, depending on the requirements of the management, on the terms of engagement. Then the information systems and the technology that the internal auditor deploys, computer-assisted audit techniques, audit softwares, etc., that the internal auditor deploys in the internal audit activity. So all these components put together will form the basis for quality assurance. Internal auditors, the person charged with the responsibility of quality assurance has to prepare his quality review questionnaire and checklist comprising of all these components and activities, right from the code of conduct that is applicable to the internal auditors. Internal auditors many times are key management personnel in the organization, are privy to price sensitive information. So whether insider trading regulations apply to the internal auditor, head of internal audit in a company, or a partner of the firm who's signing the internal audit report. What are the code of conduct? What are the code of ethics in terms of gifts, favors, conflict of interest, whether they can hold shares in the company, cannot hold shares in the company, what are the level of conflicts? Say, for example, if there is a person who has worked in the finance function in the organization and then becomes the head of audit. So whether there is a cooling period, he can immediately do the internal audit activity because he was already part of the finance and accounts function, was privy to a lot of information. So there are a lot of small issues which may snowball into independent issues, conflict check issues, the gifts and favors received by the internal auditors, say during the inventory verification exercise, if they are working for a retail industry and doing inventory verification exercise, and just out of good faith, if they are given certain gifts at the end of the inventory verification exercise? Will it be part of the independence issues? Will it be part of the conflict check procedures? So governance and structure of the internal audit function and how we are going to manage it is very important, including putting the roles, responsibilities, charters in place. Then the strategy of internal audit, how we are going to execute internal audit. We are going to do in-house, we are going to outsource it, we are going to co-source it using work of experts. What is the combination? What is the balance we want to achieve? What are the subject matter experts we want to get in the internal audit activities? So all these are very important elements and should be introduced in the quality assurance program for a continuous review. Qualifications and experience of internal auditors, training, development on a continuous basis, whether it is happening, not happening, what are the learning needs of internal audits. There is so much of complexity in regulations that is happening currently. So many amendments almost on a daily basis happening in Companies Act, GST, Income Tax Act, and so many other regulations and laws in the country. Are internal auditors well equipped, are knowledgeable, are competent, are continuously trained on all the recent amendments, or no? They need to have expertise from other firms, other sources that experts can come in. What are the work products? Are they standardized? Do we have risk and control metrics? Has there been a risk assessment at the beginning of the year on a quarterly basis, on a rolling basis? Is there a risk assessment that has happened? The nature of audit communication, and finally the type of technology and the audit tools that are being used, including the workflow tools. So all these things put together, the quality assurance framework will comprise of, and questionnaires will be developed. Now, one of the key objectives of the standard is to identify a single point of contact as far as quality assurance in internal audit activity is concerned. So this point of contact has to be somebody senior in the organization who carries the weight, who carries the gravitas to come up with a report, independent report on the quality assurance of internal audit activities. That is crucially important. So if the management has got an option as per the standard, can do a internal appointment of a person, can do a external assessment, or can do a combination of both, anything. So small organizations generally do it once in a year, once in 2 years, once in 3 years. They get an external firm to do a quality assurance in the internal audit function. Large organizations have an in-house quality reviewer who does a continuous assessment of internal audit activities. So there are various options available, but as a best practice, as a good practice, what is recommended here is that the quality assurance function, when it is being established in the organization, the audit committee and board members should be involved. Because if board members and audit committees are involved, then it will go in the right direction. The quality assurance function will have enough sponsorship, will have a proper direction, will have a proper responsibility area, and will have a upward reporting mechanism to the board and audit committee with a proper structure in the organization, so it will become effective. So all the global standards also prescribe that any quality assurance activity in internal auditing should be done through board encouragement, through board and audit committee facilitation, which is very important. The scope of quality assurance in internal audit activities as per the SIA 7 could cover not only internal audit activities, could cover also strategic activities, risk management activities, and internal control systems of the organization. So the scope of the quality reviewer can be extended beyond internal audit activities. Frequency should be decided on the basis of cost benefit analysis, on the basis of size of operations of the company, on the basis of the maybe the size of the internal audit team, etc. On the basis of that, but at least at a minimum, once in 3 years, it is highly recommended that quality assurance review should be conducted of the internal audit function. Terms of engagement of the internal audit activity should be documented, should be quality reviewed in terms of the scope, the subject matter, the audit universe. Then review and monitoring program should be established from a quality assurance perspective on a quarterly, 6 monthly, annually, or whatever is the frequency that is being decided. I already have covered the customer feedback in the previous slide, so I'll not talk about it. Now we'll go to the crux of the standard, which talks about the performance criteria and the kind of parameters that can be established as far as the quality assurance of internal audit activities are concerned. So the next few slides are all recommendatory in nature. This is not there in the standards, but this is coming out of the practical experience that I carry on the subject of quality assurance peer review of internal audit functions. So while we are developing the quality assurance checklist, we can keep in mind all these pointers. First is what is the qualification and certifications of the internal auditors. Second is diversity of exposure in terms of domain knowledge, industry knowledge, knowledge of the technical systems, be it the ERP package, e-commerce platforms, the average audit experience that the internal auditors carry, number of training hours, including the CPRs for the internal audit team members, whether they have undergone those trainings or no during the course of the year. From an audit execution perspective, whether code of conduct, ethics, conflict checks have been conducted, can be examined by the quality reviewer. Time spent by each team member on a particular audit mission or collectively by a team on each audit mission. Audit mission can be an audit unit, it can be a process unit, it can be a function, it can be a geographical unit. Turnaround time, including for audit documentation. So audit working paper management, documenting the life cycle of the entire audit. What is the turnaround time for that? Is it while the audit is happening or post completion of audit within 30 days, within 60 days? It is highly recommended that post completion of audit, any internal audit working paper should be prepared within 30 days, 30 to 60 days, not beyond that. Because if it is kept beyond that, then the value of the evidence, the value of the audit trail, interest of the auditees in giving you, supplying you with any additional information will be lost, and it is not recommended. So as a matter of internal audit policy also, this can be documented that there should be a turnaround time, and then the quality reviewer could review it. Technology orientation and the kind of leverage the internal audit team will do as far as audit technology tools are concerned. If there are any auditee complaints, feedback from auditees, etc., can be documented as part of quality assurance process. And of course, the most important one is cost and productivity. Now, this is something interesting because we all do our internal audit activities to earn our bread and butter. And if we don't do it efficiently, then chances are that probably we will lose out on a lot of money, and it may not become a profitable activity. So while we are developing a quality assurance, you yourself realize if you do a estimate of man days at the cost sheet stage, and then when the execution happens of the internal audit activities, what are the number of auditors that were actually deployed, number of productive hours versus unproductive hours, etc. While you are also making the internal audit fee estimate, you can discuss the number of internal auditors as compared to the size of the company, turnover of the company, number of employees as a percentage to that, your utilization ratios, etc. So all these things are very important from a cost efficiency productivity perspective to make the internal audit activities efficient, make them more profitable for you, and the quality reviewer could also look at these elements. From a reporting perspective, number of audits completed, reports issued, the sampling tables, whether they follow the sampling unit criteria prescribed by, say a 315 standard on sampling, special assignments executed, average reporting turnaround time, completeness, comprehensiveness of, the scope that is being executed, internal audit disclaimers and limitations. This is a critical one. The quality reviewer has to see, because internal auditors may not be able to justify all the scope items that have been assigned and entrusted to them by the audit committee or by the CEO's office. So they should be careful in forming their views, opinions. And from a quality standard perspective, they should disclaim any activity which they have not carried out or any scope item where information has not been provided, because the quality reviewer will definitely check on this aspect, and it is also required as part of the quality assurance review. Audit effectiveness, and then the general standards that are there. So I'll come to the key challenges as far as internal audit quality assurance is concerned, and how do we overcome those key challenges. First and foremost, in any internal audit activity, to get documents that are confidential in nature from the clients becomes a big challenge. So to document a working paper becomes an issue, because always the clients are telling us that we should be working on client systems, client portals, client supplied information on client environment and in client laptops. So here it is important that the working paper, from a quality assurance standpoint, the internal auditor writes down the trail in the working paper very, very clearly, that what has been verified, how it has been verified, when it has been verified, what was the time of verification in his working paper, because he will not have the audit evidence in the file or in his server or in his laptop later on. So that audit trail is very important. This is where even the courts, when they verify the work of auditors, they clearly comment on the quality of audit documentation. So this is one big practical challenge, especially in our country, where corporates don't supply all the audit evidence to internal auditors, considering that they are confidential in nature, and there are NDA agreements signed with the client. So the working paper has to be maintained very, very comprehensively to the last mile, as I explained to you, writing down the date, time, nature of information, verify how many samples passed, how many failed, what was the response of the client, etc. Everything in the working paper on a very, very clear terms should be written and should be signed off, so that that can be safeguarded, and it can come in handy as far as quality is concerned. Retention of emails, retention of audit related information again becomes a practical challenge for auditors. So they should have a side letter arrangement with the clients, that all the audit related email IDs, records, retention policies should apply to auditor's office as well, because many times client supplied laptops are given. Practically after a year or so, when you go back to the client again, the last year data completely is vanished off and a new set of laptop is given. So because clients keep on cleaning up the data in the laptops as per their organizational policies. So record retention again becomes a big challenge as far as quality review and audit trailing is concerned. So whenever a quality reviewer will come, he will come and look at historical data in your files. So you should have adequate safeguards, you should have adequate retention mechanisms and measures. From an execution perspective, knowledge updation and competency of internal auditors is very, very critical. So the internal audit team, to fulfill the requirements of getting a good grade in quality assurance review, is important that should be well trained, should be proficient on laws, and if not, then subject matter experts' help should be sought and taken to avoid last minute audit information from clients. This is again a typical internal auditor's dilemma, where clients will supply information just when the quarter is ended and the board results have to be declared, and the internal auditor is given only 7 days to do a check and come out with his report. And the statutory auditor will rely on the internal auditor's finding and report. So there should be proper safeguards against that in terms of not entertaining last minute this, or to do a roll forward review in the quarter. Go earlier on, do the first month, second month review, third month you can do it at last moment. So at least you have assurance over the first 2 months in the quarter. Establishing a single point of ownership for quality is a challenge, especially in smaller accounting firms. To invest in a resource where who can take ownership for quality reviews. Here my suggestion would be that maybe 3 or 4 firms who are smaller in size can come together, appoint a single person as an external quality reviewer, and share the cost. This will help reduce the investment in the quality assurance function as far as internal audit is concerned, and it's a real practical challenge as far as we are concerned. establish a code of conduct for gifts and favors. And also, as I was mentioning earlier, that once the doctor has prescribed the medicine, then whether the medicine is good or bad is a matter of professional judgment. So quality assurance, as far as possible, should be a timely activity, not a post-mortem job after 3 years, because then it becomes very difficult to even correct anything after 2 or 3 years have passed. So it is highly advisable that any quality assurance for internal audit activities, it should be done in a timely basis, so that timely, in time, you can identify any misouts and you can correct it and go back to the audit committee and discuss it and confidently say that you have covered it during the course of the year. So this was a snapshot of practical challenges and how we can overcome those challenges with few suggestions and recommendations. I was given 45 minutes and I have already completed my time. So I will not go further down in my presentation. I will just leave you with the last slide, which is a food for thought. So when I started my presentation, I mentioned about the headlines that we are receiving as a profession in the last 1 or 2 years about the audit quality. So it is a food for thought. It is a awakening call for all of us in terms of where we are going wrong as far as our auditing practices are concerned. So auditors generally are being hauled up for these reasons. One is failure to detect or tax evasion. Now, internal auditors, although it's a management contract, but statutory auditors rely, board rely, regulatory agencies rely. We are certifying compliances, we are issuing certifications, agreed upon procedures as part of internal audit activities. Quite likely that the law is going to come behind us also. So quality assurance is very, very important as far as internal audit activity is concerned. It is our own insurance. Like we recommend to our clients that you take insurance, to develop a safety net. Quality assurance standard SIA is an insurance for internal audit professionals are concerned and heads of internal audits are concerned. So it's like paying the premium for insurance to protect our own selves. So putting in place a quality assurance standard is nothing but ensuring ourselves against any bad times or any notices in future against our work. So with that, I will end my session today and I will hand it over back to Vikas and to Sabir. Thank you so much for
thank
the
you very
patient
much,
hearing.
sir.
Thanks.
This was indeed a very knowledgeable session for all of us.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, thank you. Now is the time for the second session of the day on the topic Standard on Internal Audit 230 and Standard on Internal Audit 240. Standard on Internal Audit talks 230 talks about objectives of internal audit, and 240 talks about using the work of an expert. The topic would be covered by CA Ankur Gupta ji. Sir is a chartered accountant with more than 10 years of experience in internal audit, risk assessment, process improvement, internal control evaluation, SOX readiness, and preparation of standard operating procedures. Sir has around 3 years of experience in internal audit team of one of the largest cement manufacturing companies in India. Sir has been part of developing standard operating practices for more than 20 companies from different sectors. Sir has authored articles for the Institute on Agile Internal Audit Methodology. Sir has significant experience in providing process improvement and internal control evaluation services to various sectors such as FMCG, pharma, cement, consumer electronics, energy, and resources and textile, among others. Sir has been part of international assignments in more than 8 countries. Welcome, Ankur sir. The dice is all yours for sharing the knowledgeable session. Thank you.
Hi, Vikas. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just give me a second. Let me just share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, my screen is visible.
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay, thanks, Vikas. So, hello everyone, and a very good evening to all of you. First of all, would like to thank the Internal Audit Standard Board for inviting me and for speaking on this session. Always a nice experience to be part of such good company and such good forums to have a chance to talk about my favorite topic, internal audit. And thank you so much to the institute and to the IASB for organizing such sessions for the benefit of the members and also for members like me to share whatever knowledge we have. So the topic that I'm going to speak on today is on SIA 230, and that is objectives of internal audit, and SIA 240, which is using the work of an expert. So as we all know, the new standards on internal audit are getting published, and some of these standards are pretty interesting and I would say new. And I think Institute has taken a very good approach in terms of keeping internal audit as a core focus and today's trends as a focus when we talk about the new internal audit standards. So, both these standards are pretty different as such, where SIA 230 is an overarching standard which, governs how the internal audit function works and overall, how do you manage internal audit and how do you define the objectives of internal audit. And it is applicable both to in-house auditors working within the company framework or internal auditors working as a professional outside of the company environment, like CA firms and professionals. So these standards applies to both, whereas the SIA 240 is a more specific standard which only talks about how do you use the work of an expert, and what are the things that you keep in mind when you use an expert during your internal audit, and how do you manage that the expert works in the framework which is defined in the SIAs overall. And since nowadays more and more experts and SMEs, which is subject matter experts, are being used in various internal audits, this standard is very important in today's time. And I'll take you through what are the different aspects which the institute has documented as far as this SIA is concerned. So what I'm going to cover today is SIA 230, which is the objectives of internal audit, and I talk about what is the purpose of defining the objectives of internal audit. What are the scope and objectives of an internal audit function? And then I'll break it up into two, which is components of a typical internal audit charter and components of a typical engagement letter. So this is something which is documented very well in the standard itself. What I have done is I've sort of summarized the text of the standard in these slides, and also added a few practical examples where these standards will be applicable. As far as SIA 240 is concerned, using the work of an expert, I'll talk about requirement for appointing an expert. What are the situations in which you will typically appoint an expert? What is the purpose of using the expert in internal audit? And how do you evaluate the work which has been done by the expert? Because eventually the responsibility of whatever work the expert is doing on your behalf is upon you as an internal auditor. How do you maintain the independence and objectivity of the expert? And how do you judge the qualifications and credentials of the expert? And how do you keep your safeguards when you get any expert on board in your internal audits? So this is something which you will see as far as, which I'll talk about as far as today's presentation is concerned. So first of all, SIA 230, objectives of internal audit. So the first question which comes is, what is the purpose of defining the objectives of internal audit? And why do you have to define the objective of internal audit? So the standard talks about the objective of internal audit help to establish the operating parameters within which the overall internal audit agenda or the function works. What happens is, let's say if you are an in-house internal audit department, how do you sort of define what is the objective of your department? What is the role, the responsibility of your department? What is the framework under which your department works, and what is the rights that you have as an internal audit department within the large company that you work for? So these are the things which typically are important to define, and that is why objectives of internal audit is an important thing to define. Similarly, when you're an outside firm working for a company, Defining the objectives of internal audit is important because you need to define why the internal audit is being done. Yes, there will be some common aspects like maintaining control, coming up with fraud vulnerable areas and stuff like that. But then you have to somewhere define what are the objectives of internal audit, what is the scope of internal audit, what are going to be the deliverables, what is the expectation of the company from the internal audit firm. So that is why it is very important to define a framework and an objective of internal audit. So the standard talks about typically four aspects. The first is document the formulation functioning of the internal audit activity in terms of the outsourced internal audit arrangement. So as I said that the internal audit activity, what will be the formulation and functioning of the internal audit activity? How will it function? Whom will they report to? What will be the reporting lines? Sometimes in a typically in-house internal audit department, you have reporting lines like internal audit might report directly to the audit committee or to the MD of the company. So what is the formulation and functioning of the internal audit department? That is, defined by this. That is important to document. And if this is an outsourced internal audit arrangement, then what are the terms of that outsourced internal audit arrangement? And this would include everything, like what is the roles and responsibilities of the firm, what is the responsibility of the company, what is the responsibility of the firm, what is the fee, what is the scope, what are the scope exclusions, how many reports will be issued, what are the deliverables, how many presentations will be given. Everything should be documented. Second is providing clarity to the internal auditor and stakeholders regarding the nature of internal audit. What many times it happens is that a lot of times the stakeholders, that is the CFOs, the CXOs and everybody, they themselves have a question about, whether this comes under the purview of internal audit or not, or whether the internal audit can get into this activity or not. So that is where it is important to document and provide a clarity around the nature of internal audit. So that is the second part. The third part is ensure linkage between what is expected out of the internal audit and how these expectations can be met. So as I said, that typically when it is an outsourced internal audit arrangement, you have a meeting with the client and they say that, okay, fine, we are looking for cost saving aspects. We are looking for so-and-so types of reports to be issued in this format. These are the kind of resources that you will put in the internal audit. So all these expectations ideally should be documented as part of the objectives of the internal audit so that there is clarity on both the sides. And the last, again, which I mentioned, is a similar aspect that provide better understanding on the key operational areas such as accountability, authority, what are the roles and responsibility and stuff like that. So it is very important to define the objective of internal audit, not only in an in-house internal audit function, but also in an outsourced internal audit function. So what does the requirement of the standard say? The requirement says that the objective of and operating parameters are formally recorded in one of these two documents. The number one is internal audit charter, which is primarily designed for the in-house team of internal auditors and its stakeholders. So most of the large organizations which have typically in-house internal audit teams, they would have a document called the internal audit charter. And if you work for a company in an internal audit department, and if your department does not have an internal audit charter, then this is a document which ideally you should prepare. And the importance of this document, or the contents of this document, I'll cover in the upcoming slides. But internal audit charter is typically, the governing document for an in-house internal audit team. The second document is the engagement letter, which is a formal contract or an engagement which is signed with the outsourced internal audit service provider. So if you are part of a CA firm, or if you're running your own practice, and if you take an internal audit mandate from a client, then typically you would sign the engagement letter. So what the standard says that either of these two documents have to be documented for any internal audit to be carried out. One of the two have to be documented. As far as internal audit charter is concerned, it is the duty of the chief of internal audit or the head of internal audit to document the internal audit charter, and document the formulation and functioning of the internal audit activity. Ideally, this internal audit charter is typically a 8-page or a 10-page document having various aspects which we'll cover later. But it is the chief of internal audit or the head of internal audit who should document such internal audit charter, and ideally should get it approved by the audit committee, because finally the chief of internal auditor is functionally reporting to the audit committee chairman. So this internal audit charter should then get approved by the audit committee. And that is what the standard says. The standard says that the chief of internal audit should ensure that the internal audit charter is reviewed and approved by those charged with governance. So in this case, typically it would be the audit committee or the board of directors, or even sometimes the chairman or the MD of the company. Also, the internal audit charter and the engagement letter shall be periodically reviewed by the chief of internal audit or the engagement partner. So there would be situations where you have internal audit charter, but then typically every year or once in 2 years, you would review that charter to ensure that any changes in regulatory compliances or any changes of law or any changes of org structure have been covered as part of that internal audit charter. Also, there might be cases that in some of the cases, both these documents may exist. Now, situations like those will be typically where you go for a co-sourced internal audit engagement. And I personally do a lot of such engagements where let's say there's a very large company, a Fortune 500 company, which typically has their own internal audit department as well. And then they also appoint an outsourced internal audit service provider. They would appoint a CA firm for that. And they would do a joint audit, or typically they would do an audit where only the head of internal audit would be involved from the client side, but the team, the managers, and everybody would be provided by the service provider. So in these cases, both the above documents may exist. The internal audit charter will also exist, which will be applicable to the in-house audit team, and the engagement letter would be applicable to the outsourced service provider. In a situation like this, both these documents should not have any clauses or any issues where they are conflicting, because that might create a bit of a problem. So you should typically ensure that both these documents are in sync. So this is the requirement as far as the standard is concerned. Now, what can be the various objectives of the internal audit functions? As I spoke about earlier, that when you document IEA charter or engagement letter, you first document what are the objectives of internal audit function, and it can be variety. Some of these are very basic, which is maintaining of internal control. So any internal audit typically would be expected to talk about internal controls, and the IEA function will always be given the responsibility to ensure that the internal control within the company is maintained. So that can be one of the objectives. The second will be examination of financial and operating information. So IEA function may be assigned to review the means used to identify, measure, report financial and operating information, and to make specific inquiries into individual items, testing of transactions, doing operating testing, doing reconciliations, and stuff like that. So any information which is financial, which is your basically books of accounts, MISs, and stuff like that, those examinations have to be done by the internal audit team. And also operating information, what is your planned production, what is your sales numbers, what are your payroll numbers and stuff like that. Whatever operating information also that the company is providing, those ideally have to be examined by the internal audit department. The third is review of compliance with laws and regulations. This is again a very common objective and scope of internal audit. In all your internal audit scope, you will see this line item that review the compliance with laws and regulations. So IEA function will always be assigned a responsibility to ensure that the firm or the client is, or the company is meeting all the compliances to the various laws and maintaining the compliance to the various regulations, be it Factories Act, labor laws, taxation laws, or different laws. So again, compliance to laws can be one of the objectives and scope part for internal audit. The fourth one, then governance. So when we talk about governance and corporate governance, IEA obviously plays a very large role. It plays the role of the third line of defense, as we typically talk about, for those of you who know what is the model of the three lines of defenses. And that is why the governance part is something which is always be part of the scope and objectives of the internal audit function. Risk management. I think risk management is again something which is now typically gaining a lot of importance. You have things like risk committee being mandated for the listed entities. You have the concept of enterprise risk management being carried out by large companies and companies which typically have a large business setup. So risk management is something which again can be objective and scope of internal audit function. And the last one is obviously review of operating activities. So any internal audit will always get into operating activities. Let's say if we are doing a audit of sales or procurement, we would always get into the operations, saying that how is the sales functioning, what are the profitability of the sales orders, what is the debtors, outstandings and stuff like that. So that is typically your review of operating activities. So these 6 are primarily examples what can be scope and objectives for a typical internal audit function. Now we come to the internal audit charter. I spoke about what can be the components of a typical internal audit charter, and what are the things which ideally you should include as far as an internal audit charter is concerned. So the first one is mission and vision of the IA function. So the first thing which comes, in the internal audit charter is the mission and vision of a IA function. What is the long-term view of the IA function in line with its reason for existence? Now, this is a heavy line, but then what typically it says is any document which you start or any charter, it should have a mission and vision for the department, right? What is the mission and vision of the internal audit function? If you have seen typically mission and vision statements of the company, they talk about building a sustainable company or building a company which is profitable or building a company which helps the community at large. Similarly, the IA function should have a mission and vision. Typically, statements like the IA function will be responsible for maintaining the overall governance framework of the company. This can be one of the examples of a mission and vision statements. The first thing which typically the IA function should document in IA charter is mission and vision. The second is purpose and objectives of internal audit. So this is something we talked about in the previous slide, that what is the scope or the objectives of an internal audit. Those have to be documented, things like compliance to laws, compliance to company policies and procedures, ensuring internal control, risk management and stuff like that. Those will be purpose and objective of internal audit. The third one is reporting structure and independence. So this is very important. In a lot of companies, there is confusion. And I've seen a lot of times there are structures where internal auditor is, let's say, reporting to the CFO of the company, or he's reporting to the CEO of the company. Now, there's nothing wrong in that, but that is not the best practice. The best practice is that the internal audit head typically reports functionally only to the audit committee chairman, because that is how internal auditor maintains his independence. Yes, administratively, he can report to the MD of the company or the CEO of the company, but functional reporting has to be to the audit committee chair. That is how the independence of the internal auditor is maintained. And that reporting structure is very important to document as when we're talking about an internal audit charter. The next is again scope and approach. So the scope of internal audit, what are the things that internal audit function will look into? How will they provide assurance and advisory to the company? What are the entities which are included or excluded in the company? What are the businesses which are included or excluded in the company? Typically, there are companies, what they do is, as far as scope is concerned, in the internal audit charter, they just give a free hand to the internal audit department, saying that internal audit has access to the complete information and all the businesses of the company to ensure that there is adequate independence and there are no biases in the internal auditor. Next is accountability and authority. So what are the things for which internal auditor is accountable for? That is things like providing assurance, improving internal controls and stuff like that. And what is the authority of internal auditor? And this is very important. A lot of times during internal audit, what comes up is, the process owners would say that, hey, you do not have the right or authority to have access to this information, or this is a confidential information. And that is why the internal audit charter helps you, because the internal auditor charter will give you that authority, saying that internal auditor has free access to all information of the company. So the next time any process owner tells you that, okay, fine, let's say this is a payroll data and this is confidential, we cannot share it with you. You can typically show them the internal auditor charter, saying that, boss, internal audit charter says that we have free access to all the information of the company, and this is company information, so we have to have access to it. So authority of internal audit is very, very important. Roles and responsibility, again, what are the different job functions which the internal auditor would play. And lastly, quality assurance and confirmation with SIS. So it sort of puts a check on the internal auditor as well, that how will they maintain the quality, how will they ensure that the SIAs of the institute are met with. So that is something which comes as far as the quality assurance part is concerned. So these are typically the components of the internal audit charter. These are obviously the bare minimum. There are internal audit charters that include things like the KRA or KPIs also for the internal audit team, or there would be charters which also includes things like the training needs or training identification of the internal audit team. So things like that also can be included as far as the internal audit charter is concerned. Now we come to typically what are the components of an engagement letter. Now this is again which is very important for people who are working as part of the CA firms or who are running their own practice. Whenever you get into an internal audit mandate, it is very important to sign off on a contract or engagement letter. Because tomorrow, in case of any disputes, the engagement letter will help you to safeguard you. So very important that before starting off of any work, you have a signed engagement letter with the client. And what are the things which you include in the engagement letter? Obviously, some of these are common with the internal audit charter, but the way they are documented will be different. So what are the purpose and objectives of internal audit? How will you maintain independence and objectivity? The third part is very important. What will be the scope and approach? Ideally, when you document a engagement letter, you should document very nicely that what is the scope of internal audit and in a lot of detail. Because what happens is, let's say if you have documented a very basic scope, saying that we will cover the operations of the company. Now, the operations of the company is very wide. It will include production, plant maintenance, sales, procurement. So, what exactly will we cover? If you go to L2 and level 2 scope and you say, I'll cover procurement, sales, treasury, finance, again, that is a very broad scope. Ideally, you should go to a level 3 saying that, okay, in procurement, these are the 8 things or 10 things which I'll cover. I'll cover purchase orders, I'll cover vendor master, I'll cover payments, AP and stuff like that. What that will do is that will safeguard you if tomorrow there is something which you have not covered, or again, that will help you to decide what are the expectations of the client. Sometimes what happens is the client has a lot of expectations from the internal auditor. And that is where when you document the scope, you understand that, okay, fine, this is the volume of the work which I have to carry out. The next two are very basic: accountability and authority, roles and responsibilities. Then you come to the limitations. Now, this is again, which is very important that, what are the limitations of the audit, and typically things like, you safeguard yourself saying that a lot of internal audit is dependent on the information which is provided by the client. So you build those limitations as part of your engagement letter. Then quality assurance, reporting and compensation, again, very important that, how many reports will be issued, what will the format of the reports, who will be the issued to, and the compensation of the fee part, what will the fee, the payment terms, whether the expenses and the taxation is included in the fees or not, things like that would be included in the compensation part. Ownership of working papers. This is very important that, when you do internal audit, you will basically document a lot of working papers. So who is the owner of those working papers? Typically those ownerships should lie with you, okay, as a CA firm. That clarity should be there in the engagement letter. And termination of arrangement. So in case the termination has to be done, and what circumstances it can be done, how many days of notice will be given, what will be the process for termination, that also should be documented in engagement letter. So before I move on, just to summarize, we spoke about standard 230 and the objective of internal audit. So typically 2 documents is what the standard talks about. One is the internal audit charter, which is for the in-house internal audit department. So the internal audit charter basically is for the head chair, and you document what are the roles and responsibilities, the structure, the accountability, how the IA function, in-house IA functions, perform. Everything is documented as part of the IA charter. The second document is the engagement letter, which is typically documented for outsourced internal audit, firm. And you basically document the scope and approach, fees, the roles and responsibility, ownership of working papers, limitations, confidentiality clause, everything as part of the engagement letter. That is the Bible against which you will work, and also the client will always refer to the engagement letter when they come back to you for any doubts or expectations. So this is what SIA 230 spoke about. Moving on to SIA 240, which is using the work of an expert. Now, this is very interesting, and this is a very important standard in today's date. Today, what is happening is that there are 2 things which are happening. One is on the business side. The businesses are continuously evolving. You are seeing more and more technology and IT We are talking about blockchain and automations and AI and stuff like that being introduced in various companies, bots being used and stuff like that, for which a typical internal auditor or a CA would end up having some sort of, I would say, bottleneck to give 100% assurance, and that is where they need subject matter experts, or they need these SMEs to help them in the internal audits. The second thing which is happening is that the expectation from internal audit is continuously going up, and people are expecting internal audit not only to see the financial side of things but also to the operating side of things, and that is where typically the internal audit sort of has to reskill themselves or end up hiring a services or an expert. And that is where the standard is very, very important. So typically the first thing the standard talks about is who is an expert. So the expert is a person or entity. It may be an association of person or firm which possesses certain special skills or unique knowledge along with some years of experience and expertise in a particular area, field, or discipline. A very basic definition of an expert. So, things like, let's say, and I'll come to that. So why are experts appointed? First, let's talk about that. And I already spoke about that. An expert is generally appointed to help complete part of IE assignment or situations where the required skills are not available with the internal audit team. So typically the internal audit team, in a CA firm or in-house internal audit function will be a team of finance professionals, a team of chartered accountants or MBAs. They might not have the complete gambit of knowledge which is required to perform an internal audit. And that is where the expert services are required. Now, how can experts assess? So experts obviously assess by applying their expertise and technical know-how, and they can be in complex areas of field. And the standard gives some examples. So information technology, IT, civil, electrical, mechanical engineering, banking, oil and gas industries, or it may be special discipline like actuarial services, forensic, taxation, intellectual property or stuff like that. So think about this. Let's say if you're doing an internal audit, and there's a very typical GST review which you are doing, in which your observation depends a lot on the evaluation of the GST law, and in which you might need expert services of someone who's an expert in GST law, taxation laws. That is where you typically bring someone like him on board and see that, okay, fine, you jointly do that audit and give a proper recommendation to a client. Or, when I talk about a particular field, let's say if you're doing an audit of a project company, and you have to check, the work completion certificates of the contractors, the work done till now, the quality assessment of the work done till now. So typically, we would, as chartered accountants, have some sort of, I would say, issues or bottlenecks in terms of performing, or limitations in terms of performing such reviews. So that is where you bring, civil engineers or mechanical engineers on board, because they are experts in that. They can give you a much better view around it, and they can give much better assurance to the client as well. So these are typically how the experts assist in annual function. So what are the different purposes of using the services of an expert? So first, as I talk about, it can be technical assistance or support from competent experts, where internal audit team does not possess the necessary knowledge. The second can be work performed is in conformation to the applicable pronouncement of ICI. The third is internal audit procedure conducted in complex and specialized areas meet the expected quality standards. Let's say if your client is expecting you to get the best of subject matter experts, to give them 100% assurance, to give them industry best practices, you would need services of such experts. And also that the outcome of the IA work is credible and reliable. Instead of you coming up and saying that there have been issues around the quality parameters of a project, and you give some vague recommendations. If you have a civil engineer on board, you will be able to give exact recommendation that, okay, fine, you are probably not doing a proper slab testing, or you are not doing a proper concrete testing, or the material which the contractor is using is not proper, or your project planning is inadequate, and stuff like that. So the outcome of internal audit work for it to be credible and reliable, you need such experts onboarded. Now, before getting an expert on board, it is very important to evaluate the independence and objectivity of the expert, because typically you don't want a situation where the independence of the expert is not there or is restricted, which would typically affect your work and your commitment, which you have given as part of the IA charter or as part of the engagement letter. So let's say the expert is the employee of the company or an external service provider. So one of the things which you need to evaluate is whether you are using the services of the employee or the company or external service provider. So if you're using the services of the external service provider, that is a better situation, because for them to be influenced by the company management, the chances are very less. If it's an employee of the company, he may get influenced. However, there are situations where the employee of the company are also used an expert. Nothing wrong in that, but you have to make that evaluation. We used to be part of an internal audit team, where what we used to do was, for any review of plant operations, we would get someone from the technical sides of another plant location who would come with us and do that audit. What would happen is, since we were using an employee of another plant, the chances of him getting influenced was a little less. So you have to do those safeguards. The second is the relationship of the expert. If there is an ongoing relationship that the expert has with the company management, let's say if you have hired a civil engineer for internal audit, but that civil engineer is already directly working with the company management, then he would not have that level of independence or objectivity. So you have to evaluate those parameters also, that what are the relationships that the expert already shares with the company management. Then the personal interest, whether the expert has any personal, financial or organizational interest in the company. Let's say if he has some relatives who are on the board of the company, who would obviously not be as independent, or he's already a vendor or a customer of the company, then again the independence would get restricted. And then the appointment and the supervising authority. So how is the appointment of the expert being carried out? Who is approving the expert appointment? Things like that also have to be evaluated. After having done the evaluation of the independence of the expert, the next thing to do is evaluate the qualification and credentials of the expert. So what the internal auditor should typically do is they should independently validate the qualification credentials of the experts, because what will happen is, tomorrow you don't want a situation that you have got an expert on board, but then he's not qualified to do the scope of work or to meet the expectation of the client or the expectations that you yourselves have. And there are a lot of times where that it happens, that you get let's say a civil engineer on board, but then he has never done that size of a project which you are auditing, and he will fall short, and that eventually would come upon you, because you are finally the responsible party as far as carrying out the internal audit is concerned. So very important to evaluate what are the qualification credentials of the expert. So what you do is typically 4 things. You confirm what are the educational and professional qualifications, where all the expert has memberships of professional bodies. Second, you do a background and a reference check. So what I would do is I would ask for credentials from the expert. I would tell him that, okay, give me references of 2 or 3 clients where you have done similar sort of work. That would give you some sort of comfort. The third is, similar details of instances, nature of similar past engagement. So you can take typical case studies or use cases from the experts, asking him that, have you done similar work or not? What are the results of that work? And fourth is also doing a self-certification by the expert regarding the above things, and also ensuring that he does a self-certification on conflict of interest and pending disciplinary actions also. So typically this is very similar to what the client would do with us when we are outsourced internal audit agency. They would take such self-certification from us. You should do that from the expert as well. What that would do is, tomorrow if something comes up that, okay, fine, this expert was not independent, or there were some disciplinary issues around him or stuff like that, you can at least show such self-certification and safeguard your own interest. So this is how you evaluate the complete qualification credentials of the expert. So what are the requirements of the standards? Number 1, the internal auditor should make an independent determination of using the work of an expert based on technical complexity of the subject, the risk assessment, and the comparison of the expertise available within the IA team, and to conduct a quality audit. So typically, the expert should be hired only in very rare cases. I would not say rare cases, but cases where the engagement is a little technical. You should not, let's say, if it's a simple control testing job or it's a simple finance audit, you would not need a work of an services of experts. So you should make that evaluation. Also, the internal auditor should conduct an independent evaluation of the credentials and the qualification of the expert. That is the responsibility of the internal auditor. And then they should define the scope and approach of the expert. The audit objectives, the identification of the subject matter expert, define what is the specific requirement, what is the information which will be required by the expert, and whether that information required is available or not. Define certain assumptions, or the extent of access required, and also the confidentiality. Because when you get an expert on board, it is typically an outside agency. They would also get access to a lot of company information. You should always sign an NDA with such expert and ensure that the confidential clauses are documented in the contract which you have with such experts. The last line here is very important, which is internal auditor shall remain ultimate responsibility for internal audit conclusions and opinions. So see, finally, what would happen is that whatever work that you do, internal auditor will always remain the ultimate responsibility. The company or the client would always come to you and ask you that, okay, fine, these were the results of your internal audit. You are the person who has to explain to the audit committee. You are the person who is responsible. So the expert might still get away by doing a shabby job or by doing an incomplete job. Sorry, but it would eventually come up to you. So you have to really safeguard your interest, and that is why this standard is very important. That you cannot just get any person on board as an expert and use his services. You have to do a complete evaluation. Why the expert is required, who is the expert, what are the qualifications of the expert, manage all the safeguards and define the scope and approach of the expert. And then eventually you do a joint report, but still you would be the ultimate responsible party as far as the expertise is concerned. Now, how do you evaluate the work of an expert? So typically 5 things. One is detailed review of the report and findings. So you have to do a detailed review of the kind of work the expert has done. Even if you are not an expert in that area, you have to go into the depth of the audit that he has done, the work that he has done, and to ensure that the report and findings are correct. Also check the extent and thoroughness of the procedures completed. A lot of times what happens is that these experts, they typically come from a non-audit background. So they don't know how the audit has to be conducted. You have to do how do you have to do testing of the controls? What is the extent of testing that you have to do? So what they would do is they would come up with some motherhood statements that, okay, fine, the project planning needs improvement. A civil engineer might come with that observation, but then what is the extent of check that he has done? Has he gone into the depth of the subject? Has he been thorough in the subject? So these are the typical things which you have to evaluate when you evaluate the work of an expert. The third is scope limitation or other hurdles. Now, this is very important. What happens is that when you yourself are doing your work, you are aware of the limitations which you had while doing the internal audit. The expert similarly would have a lot of limitations. Let's say if you have come with an expert who's a IT person who's doing, let's say, SAP review. And there are certain modules, or there are certain T codes, or there are certain tables, the access of which has not been provided to the IT expert. Now, because of which his audit or his findings will not be complete. Now, such limitations have to be documented, or such missing information has to be documented as part of the report. So you have to go to the expert and you have to confirm with him what are the information or the scope limitations which he faced while doing the audit. Also, then you review certain work papers, as I already mentioned, not only the report, you have to try and get into the work papers to understand that there is proper basis, especially for the significant observations, because tomorrow when you go to the audit committee or to the management, the expert might not be there and they will come back to you and ask you that, what are these observations based on? So you should have complete understanding and confidence in the work papers that has been documented to come up with such observations. And lastly, harmony with the rest of the IE report. What would happen is the expert would be doing a part of the audit, you would still be doing the chunk of the audit. So both such reports should ideally be talking to each other. They should have a harmony with each other. Typically simple things like the format of IE report. It cannot be different for an expert and for you. There can be some changes, but it should be in harmony. So it should not happen that his report is in PowerPoint, yours is in Word, his is in a different format, yours is in a different format. So that harmony has to be maintained. Also, in exceptions cases, conducting additional procedure, engaging another expert may be required. So let's say you hired an expert, he came up with certain observation, but now you don't have complete confidence in the work that has been done by him. Or the management themselves say that this is a very significant finding, but we need a second opinion. We need you to double check whether his observations are correct or not. That is where you might go for engaging another expert to resolve any inconsistency or to double check the work which has been done by the expert. So this is how you evaluate the work of an expert. Also, documentation. Very important. We know the famous line that not documented is not done for an internal audit. So you have to document everything when you come up with an expert, which is part of the internal audit. So what are the procedures conducted to validate the requirement of the expert? That has to be part of your audit file. What are the procedures conducted to validate the independence objective of the expert? Very important to document such procedures as well. Because tomorrow, if some issue comes up, these procedures are something which will help you to safeguard you, saying that, okay, fine, I performed all the procedures to validate the independence and objective of this expert. The third is how do you documenting the procedures which have been conducted to verify the qualification credentials of the expert. Then also, the procedures for defining the scope, approach, and the summary of the review, which was completed to evaluate the quality and the reliability of the work performed. So whatever quality assurance that you have done on the work of the expert, that also has to be part of your documentation part. So typically, everything that we have spoken about, right from the requirement of hiring an expert to evaluating the work of an expert, everything has to be documented as part of your audit file, and those documentation has to be maintained in addition to the documentation like work papers, evidence, and stuff like that, because it will be important for you to ensure that the expert appointment was done in all fairness without any bias, and you had compliance with the standards of internal audit while doing such appointment. So the documentation again is very important. Now, what I've done is I've also given an illustrative list of expert usage. What are the situations in which typically you may hire an expert usage. This is again an illustrative list. You might have a situation where I would say there might be additional instances as well. Number one is physical verification. So typically, usually physical verification is something which is always part of a internal audit scope. But then you would have situations where, let's say, you have to carry out physical verification of a coal mine, where the stock of coal is very voluminous. It is lying around the mines. It is not something which you can go and physically count. And you need expert services who use tools like total station method or 3D scanners or various tools, such engineers, mine engineers use to come up with a quantity of coal or limestone which is lying in such mines. So that is where, for carrying out physical verification, you might come up using the work of an expert. In fact, nowadays, a lot of companies have started using drones for doing physical verification. So again, that is an example of using the work of an expert. IT, as I spoke about, you might come up with reviews which typically would require you to do ITGC audit. So using SAP or Oracle experts to review IT configuration, SODs. This is again an example of using the work of an expert. Cyber reviews. So, now cyber security is something which is very big, and there are times when internal audit is expected to go into cyber security. And I would not recommend you to directly take up with cyber security reviews, because it is much more than doing a typical only firewall or IT policy review. You need to get into things like PAPT, phishing attacks, hacking controls, cyber controls. So that is where you typically hire cyber security experts. Plant maintenance, so a lot of times in my clients, also in pharma clients or in chemical clients, we hire chemical engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers to do assurance, need to maintenance plan schedules and stuff like that, because as chartered accountants, we can talk about the maintenance cost, labor cost, and things like that. But whether the maintenance plan in itself is adequate or not, for that you would eventually need engineers. Capex reviews. So if you're carrying out capex reviews and you have to review on the technical side of things, what to help you out, work measurement or reconciliation of the quality and the quantity of work. Also talk about the quality of work which is being carried out, whether the IS standards, BS standards are being met or not. You would need civil engineers in such areas. HSC, health, safety and environment. So there are specialists who have experience in health, safety reviews, environment reviews. So any scope areas which involves HSC, you would typically use specific experts who would have experience in such areas. And then industry level, if like right now we are doing an audit for, I'm leading an audit which is for an oil and gas company. So we have hired experts who are oil and gas and drilling experts, because that is something which is a very important area of the audit that we are doing. So we have hired them to help us out and to carry out a joint audit. There have been times where, for audits, like I said about chemical companies, we have hired chemical engineers to help us out for doing typically the production audit and the production planning audits, because that is something which cannot be done by typically chartered accountants. So these are some of the illustrative examples where experts can be used. See, the way you use experts is, if you're an in-house internal audit team and there is a very high expectations from you, which typically cannot be performed by you, you have to bring this topic up with the management or the audit committee that you will need that additional budget to hire the services of an expert. Similarly, if you are a CA firm who has been given a mandate by the client saying that, look, we need you to cover our capex, and we are building a new plant which is a large plant, and we need you to go and check whether the qualities of construction is correct or not, whether the reconstruction is happening or not, and we need you to go into technical things. That is when you tell them that, okay, fine, this is something for which I will need to use the work an expert, and it will be an additional effort and maybe additional commercial fee also for me, because this is something which is over and above the typical scope which I usually do. So using the work of an expert can actually help you to give more quality work to the client, and also to increase your overall scope and overall, I would say, fee from the client as well. But then you have to ensure that adequate safeguards are maintained, because finally the expert is typically usually an outside agency. So you will have some sort of reliance on the work which is being done by him. So this is where I wanted to wrap up. But before that, SIA 240 just wanted to again summarize that for hiring any work of an expert, typically you have to ensure that you document what is the requirement of hiring an expert. How have you come up with the appointment of an expert? How have you ensured that the expert is indeed an expert with adequate qualifications, credentials? What are the safeguards that you take while evaluating the work of an expert, and how do you document the complete process of evaluating the work of an expert? So typically these are the things which are part of the SIA 240. So this was it from my end. I think I was able to sort of summarize the SIA 230 and 240. I would also recommend all the members who are there on this call to go ahead and read the SIAs also, because it's a very simple, in a simple manner that the institute has drafted the SIAs. But what I had presented was a summary of the SIAs. But when you read the complete SIA, that would obviously be more clear and give you more context around the requirement of both the standards. So that is it from my end. Thank you so much, the ISB and the Institute, for having me here, and thanks Vikas for moderating the session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sir. That was undoubtedly a very wonderful session. So we do have one specific question for you, sir. Can you please take up the question? Okay, so I'll just read the question. So the question says, can an internal auditor be expected to provide the same level of expertise and assurance on group financial statement as that provided by an external auditor?
Okay. See, typically what happens is, obviously, when you talk about a statutory auditor, which is what I'm understanding from the question, they obviously have a much larger responsibility as far as giving reliance on a financial statement is concerned, because they are reporting to the audit committee, they're reporting to the board, they are also reporting to regulatory authorities, and also finally the shareholders are depending on the independent auditor's report. But then, having said that, if you talk about internal auditor, we are also, or the internal auditor is also responsible for the, I would say, the numbers or the figures which are coming up as far as the internal audit, as far as the financial statements are concerned. And that is where the SIA 230 really helps, that is documenting the objective of internal audit. If in the internal audit, let's say if you're outside the agency or a CA firm who's doing the internal audit, and if that is something which is not part of your scope itself of doing a financial statement audit, then for you to give reliance on that is something which is very difficult. And that is where the engagement letter or the contract helps you, where you document what is the scope of work being given to you. So that tomorrow, if something comes up that, okay, fine, some issue came up, and why didn't the internal auditor point it out, you can actually show them the IES scope and say that this is something which is not part of my scope. So yes, there will be some limitation around the expectation from the internal auditor, but then you should always go back to your client and always include financial statements and accounts as part of your internal audit scope, because finally that is something which is that is the information on which a lot of stakeholders are dependent on. So you would want that to be part of your IES scope. You should give that push to the client. If that is still not part of your scope completely, you should scope out and build those limitations as part of your EA report upfront. That, okay, fine, I'm doing a limited review. I don't have access to complete information, or I'm not involved in the financial statements review. So that would safeguard your interest.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So now for the last session of the evening, I would like to welcome CA Prakash Kulkarni ji on the topic internal audit of procurement function in the era of digitalization. So, Sir is a BCom graduate, FCA. He has passed final exam of ICWA, CISA, DISA, CIA, certificate on FAFD, is registered insolvency professional with IBPI. Sir is a partner in GD Apte and Company since 1988. He has experience in internal audit of listed, unlisted companies and MSMEs. He has done forensic audit of large bank borrowers, assisted law enforcement agencies. He has performed central statutory audit of public sector banks and cooperative banks. Sir is a faculty for ICI seminars on bank audit, majorly focusing on agricultural advances, internal audit, standard on auditing. He is also the past president of ISACA Pune chapter. Welcome, Kulkarni sir.
Thank you, Vikasji, for nice introduction. Let me share my presentations. You do it through share screen, or?
Yes, we do it through share screen.
Is it visible?
Not yet, sir.
Is it visible now? Just 1 minute. I have to do it from Zoom or Mr. Aya? Once. Just give me a minute. Yeah, I opened it. Yeah, yeah. Good evening, friends. Uh, the topic given to me today is global trends in internal audit. In this theme, internal audit of procurement function in the era of digitalization. Uh, this is the broad outline of my presentation. Procurement function, how it evolved in last, say, century or last 3-4 decades. Then we'll talk about how audit of that function was being done earlier. Then we'll just ponder around what is digitization and what is digitalization, what is the difference between them, and procurement function, how it is happening today in this era of digitalization, and how internal auditors should take care of certain functions to cover various aspects of internal audit of procurement. So this is the broad outline. All of you are aware, and most of you may have done audit of procurement function. Procurement function has changed a lot during last uh, decade or during last 5 years, especially after COVID. Not only in corporates, companies, educational institutions, medical business, or hospitals. In our household also, our routine procurement function has changed a lot. All of you are aware, earlier we used to go to our grocery shop with bags in hand and bring our monthly grocery, go to vegetable vendor, go to milkman, or milkman used to bring milk to us. All that was happening for years together. After that, these department stores came, malls came, and we started going to big bazaar or similar malls and bring so many things, including our clothes and whatnot. COVID taught us a lesson during last 2 years, and the online trade increased by leaps and bounds, and everybody now, in especially in young generation, he will depend upon online buying of almost everything, including capital goods, jewelry, clothes, vegetables, grocery, everything. So similarly, in industry also, this procurement function has changed a lot during last various decades. If we consider the pre-computerization area, when everything was being done manually, the communication with vendors used to take place by post of government of India, or later then by courier. A conversation was being made on telephone calls, etc. Data and documents of vendors and products, etc. Everything was maintained in hardbound files by way of printouts or handwritten information. Inquiries were sent and quotations were received on paper, either handwritten, later on typed, and they were being communicated later on by telex, fax, etc. This was advancement of communication. Then comparative analysis of quotations, and everything was being done. Sorry, has been typed annually. It is manually. It was being done manually. Purchase orders were written on hand on PO forms. Later on, they were typed manually and sent to the vendors. Goods receipt notes, that is the next function after receipt of goods, they were also being prepared manually in hand on pre-printed forms which were bound in books serially numbered for internal control, etc. And purchase invoices, in case of small parties, they were also written in hand. In case of big entities, they were initially typewritten and they were received and processed um, by the companies. As far as audit, either statutory audit or internal audit is concerned, main function was three-way match that was existing, like purchase order, GRN, and purchase invoices. Auditors used to sit with three different files, or a file of purchase order on one hand and purchase invoices along with GRN on other hand, and they were physically matching the entries, calculating the amount of purchases by multiplying on calculator, rate multiplied by quantity, etc. This was the audit work done till maybe 1980 or 85. After that, computers, or rather personal computers, were introduced, and all the documents were being prepared in this computerized environment. Initially, standalone systems were used for procurement function, for inventory management, etc. They were in silos. Information was in silos in different PCs. They were not even initially connected to each other. Later on, they were connected, but within same building, not in other buildings. Data of vendors, materials, products, etc. that was started maintained on computers. Purchase orders were generated from the procurement system on PCs. Copies of POs were again printed and maintained in files. GRNs, etc. they were prepared from inventory management system. But other functions were being done manually, like comparative sheets, etc. And purchase invoices were generated from sales system and being sent. Again, hard copies were sent. There was no system of email till 1995 or 2000. So all of them were sent by post, courier, etc. Again, three-way match principle was there, and some data was available on computers and that was being used. But mostly the function of audit, either statutory or internal audit, was done by manual verification of documents. Later on, after 2000, 95 or 2000, ERPs were introduced. ERP were comprehensive packages or enterprise resource systems, and variety of functions were handled by these ERPs, like production planning, vendors management, vendors empanelment, procurement, inventory, sales, distribution, logistics. All these functions were being handled by only a single comprehensive system, which was integrated. And all these modules were integrated with each other, and data was also being shared. Finance and costing, that was also integrated in this ERP. All the functions, like say production planning, purchase requisitions, MRP, purchase orders, everything was handled from the ERP. Approvals were given online, and the system of taking approvals on hard copies was started getting discontinued by the companies. GRNs also were getting generated through system, and all this data was available to auditors for the purpose of audit in the electronic form. This three-way match function was also configured in ERP. So whatever purchase order is raised, for that only GRN was getting prepared. That control was built in. And for the GRN which is prepared, purchase invoice was being recorded in ERP, in finance module or materials module. So this three-way match was the earlier work which was being done by auditors manually by taking GRN and purchase orders and purchase invoice. This was being handled by computers. And then internal auditors, they could concentrate on other quality areas in procurement audit. And auditors started working on variety of audit areas. We'll deal with that later on when data was available from ERP. Now, which are these areas? Vendor development activities were being covered in audit. Vendor empanelment, how vendors are selected and empaneled with the company. How vendor master is created or modified. How it is maintained in ERP. This was being covered in procurement audit. Vendor appraisal, annual appraisals. This function was also being covered. Vendor reconciliation, account reconciliation was being carried out by finance department, the help of purchase department, by calling statements from the vendors. This was also being handled in ERP. As far as actual procurement is concerned, all these activities were carried out in ERP and being audited from various angles by the internal auditors. Say MRP, we have discussed about this MRP, purchase requisitions, how they are raised, how they are monitored. Quotations, calling of quotations and tenders from empaneled vendors, this activity was being audited. Comparative analysis was being done in ERP itself, and negotiations were carried out with the selected vendors from whom quotations have been called for. Based on that, purchase decision was being taken and purchase orders were being raised through system, and their through ERP they were communicated to the vendors through system only. PDF copies duly approved were being sent. Follow-up of purchases was done with the help of ERP, and goods receipt was prepared, as we discussed. For the authorized purchase orders, only goods were allowed to be received, and goods receipt notes or MRN was being prepared through ERP. Then three-way matching, and later on payment of the supplier, that was also being handled through ERP, through internet banking. So this was the scenario. Now we'll discuss a bit about what is digitization and what is digitalization. There is a vast difference in between. It is not a subtle difference. Digitization, as you know, all the companies and everywhere digitization is happening. Government of India has taken a massive exercise of digitization of their records, including land records. What is digitization? That is converting of this existing data in a paper format into digital format, from analog to digital format. That is digitization. So instead of maintaining all the data in files and registers, that will be maintained in digital form, so that it can be preserved for longer years, and it can be accessed and retrieved with very much efficiency. If we have to see any land record in a, say, taluka place, we have to visit that place, go to that office and see that record and obtain the land record extract. That has become very simple now. In almost all the states, land records have been digitized, and we can go to the website and give the required numbers. Sometimes we have to pay the required fees and get our 712 extract or land record extract, even digitally signed by government authorities. So to this extent, digitization has taken place. In our offices also, chartered accountants offices, digitization has taken place a lot. Earlier, we used to maintain all the files in physical form, and now they have been maintained in digitized form. Audit reports are scanned and maintained as a part of our record. So digitization is in every sector now. Now coming to digitalization, digitalization is the use of digital technologies to change the business process so as to provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. So instead of doing the business in our old format, it is being done in a digital format. All the activities, entire activities, they are being done with the use of digital technology. Which are these activities? We can discuss in later slides. So digitalization, what is the benefit? It moves beyond digitization. Digitization is the one process of converting our physical records into digital records. But digitalization is going much beyond that. It leverages digital information technology to entirely transform the business process. And all of you know the examples how the business has been transformed. We know we are using various apps. We are using Amazon. We are using Flipkart to do our requirements of our home at our home also. And that is the entire transformation. We are not required to go to any cinema house, book our tickets, come back, and then again visit for watching the cinema. You know how it is being done. Similarly, air tickets, train tickets. You go to any area of our day-to-day needs, and digitalization has taken place. So not only it is in corporates, but in our personal life also, digitalization has changed our way of life. Now, this company Vedanta, this has done some research. Though digitalization has taken place to extreme level, what is the position? At present, 79% of the companies use spreadsheet for supply chain planning. So all the companies have not moved completely to use digital technology to the fullest extent. So a lot of work is being done manually. In a fully digitalized company, all these routine jobs will be done with the help of computers only. And less than 25% say that their supply chain plans are integrated with their manufacturing, procurement or sales department. So more than 75% companies, all these functions are not totally integrated so as to take proper benefit of digitalization. Now, what are these new technologies which are being used? First is e-procurement. All of you are aware that government departments have started e-procurement in a very big way. Public sector companies and very large private sector companies are going for e-procurement. So all the activities like floating of tenders till receipt of goods, all these activities are being done through digital process only. We are not required to go and visit the office and file our forms, tenders, and whatnot. That all you can do sitting at your office in digitized form. So e-procurement has started in a massive scale, and in the years to come, it will increase by leaps and bounds. Then what are various technologies used to support this e-procurement? First is cloud data and computing. Many of you may be using cloud data for your office purpose also. Instead of putting data on your servers and PC in your office, the data is put on cloud, and various facilities are being made available. Various applications you can use with this cloud data. Other technologies, artificial intelligence, we'll talk about that later on. Blockchain is the very new technology which is being introduced in financial sector, so that all the ledgers of the bank will be put on the servers in a blockchain methodology, so that it can be accessed simultaneously by customers as well as bank for various actions. So blockchain technology will be very popular in the years to come, and Reserve Bank of India also is propagating this blockchain technology. IoT, Internet of Things, that is happening, and that is being used by corporates on a very massive scale. We'll see some examples of this later on. Quantum computing is a very nascent technology. All of you know that computers use 1 and 0, these two digits, for all the computational purposes. In case of quantum technology, atoms and subatoms are being used for the purpose of computing, and this computing, this science provides the facility that the computational speed is at least 100 times more than the computers which are on normal digital form of by using 1 and 0 as the digit. So it is a new technology, but it will be part of our life later on in coming years. Robotics are being used by companies not only for handling of products, etc. They are being used for various other functions, and robotics will be part of our life. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and extended reality, this will be also part of our life, either for attending meetings, gatherings, etc., or even for various other purposes. Big data analytics, that we will discuss in later slide. 3D printing will be very much used, starting with medical technology or product design, etc. So we will get the exact replica of the product which we are going to manufacture, instead of just seeing the picture on paper with the normal printout. So 3D technology will be used in a massive scale. 5G will be introduced. Instead of 4G, what we are using now, 3G or 4G, 5G technology will be part of our life in the next year to come. All this brings a various cyber security risk. I will not talk on this cyber security risk because it is a separate topic by itself. But whenever we are going for computerization and whenever we are getting connected to the external world, cyber security risk we have to face. Many companies face malware attacks and similar types of hacking, and even our Twitter or even our Facebook, that was being hacked by certain discreants. So that also risk we are facing, either in personal use of computers or in corporates. or even in government. So there should be proper controls to avoid these cyber security risks. We'll little bit talk about some new technologies which we are being used by corporates. IoT devices are being used to monitor vehicles, machinery, equipments, logistics. It is being used in a massive scale in logistic function, inventory management, warehouse management, asset management, tracking mechanism is being done with the use of Internet of Things. And whatever functions being handled manually, they are being handled with the use of this technology of IoT. As you are aware, for certain functions, vehicles are on the road, maybe for distribution or collection or distribution. All this vehicle tracking mechanism is monitored through IoT now with the help of GPS. So sitting in the office, the controlling authorities monitor how vehicles are being run, where they are located, what distance they have traveled, and what is their trip duration, when they are expected to come back. If any vehicle is not functioning properly, it is under breakdown, what has happened, where it is located, so that corrective actions can be taken. Earlier, all this was being done manually, but through IoT, it is being controlled. And so distribution function, sales and distribution function has improved a lot with the help of this IoT technology. Similarly, all the data regarding consumption, etc., consumption of diesel, all this data is also being captured through IoT functions. A lot of controls have been built in this on these vehicles, so that unwanted things or irregularities or even frauds can be avoided. I'll give you one example. The companies who are buying diesel, earlier normal lock was being put on that diesel vehicle, diesel tanker, which was being used to transport diesel from the warehouse of say IOC or HOC, or sorry, HP or BP to the company. Now various smart locks have been provided on these diesel tankers, so that whenever a tanker leaves the warehouse after filling, lock is provided, which is a smart lock. The tanker starts from that place. Immediately as the tanker starts, message is given to the company's representative on SMS that this tanker has started, so that they can start monitoring the travel of this tanker, how much time it is expected to take, etc. They know the time of arrival of this tanker in their factory or warehouse, whatever it is. The driver cannot open that lock of the tanker. It is a smart lock, so he cannot take out any part of the diesel. Earlier, this pilferage or used to take place from that diesel tanker. As soon as the tanker arrives at the factory, then along with the company representative, the company which has bought the diesel, it can be opened. He will receive an password from the diesel supplying company, and with that password only that lock can be opened. Even it is configured that you can configure the area in which that diesel will be unloaded, and unless that diesel tanker reaches that area, that password cannot be activated. So to this extent, IoT is facilitating internal controls on this activity. So this is only one example, and in all these activities of logistics and distribution, IoT is being used. Similarly, cloud technology is being used. Cloud-based applications are being used. You need not buy a software now. You can subscribe to that. It need not reside on your server also. From cloud, you can use that software, do whatever analysis you want to do with the data, again, which is residing on another server on cloud. So most of the procurement automation tool are using cloud-based data for storage of data as well as running these applications. Artificial intelligence is being used by companies in a great way. Very large companies are depending upon artificial intelligence. Companies like say Amazon, Walmart, those who are handling massive data and massive products on massive scale, They are using artificial intelligence for all their operations. Companies are using AI for demand forecasting, scheduling maintenance of their vehicles or machinery, detecting anomalies in products which are being manufactured and being inspected. AI is used in the inspection procedures. For cost optimization and also managing inventory, AI is being used in a very big way. Big data analytics also, this is a very new technology. This data from various systems, variety of systems, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 systems, it will be put together, and for that it is called big data analytics, and it will be used in business decisions like predictive analysis, analytics or risk analysis, data mining, slice and dice analysis. That means the report, what report you want, the same report will be prepared by using variety of methods in this big data analytics. So these are some of the examples of new technologies which are being used by businesses, and auditors, maybe statutory auditors as well as more internal auditors, be more required to get at least basic knowledge of these technologies which are being used by corporates if they are to do internal audit of the particular area which they are auditing. Now, there are various benefits of these automated functions. A lot of automation has taken place with digitalization, increasing transparency of operations. All the operations are transparent and they are not depending upon a particular person. We have to depend upon systems. So transparency has taken place. Reducing human errors. Definitely, a person is bound to make certain errors and they will be avoided. Cost reduction is one of the motto of computerization, and it is being achieved. Automating tedious tasks. Certain tasks it is impossible for a person to handle in a limited time and limited cost. They are being handled with the use of computers. Take the example of say mall, and whatever inventory management and procurement has to be done for a mall. There are number of shops and number of items, thousands of items being supplied in that mall. So that procurement function or reordering is being done with the help of these artificial intelligence and other technologies. So otherwise, consider that we have to put a person, go to the particular shelf and identify what stock is remaining and whether to reorder and what quantity to reorder. If this is being done by us manually, it is just impossible to do that. It is a very tedious task which is being handled by computerized systems now. Competitive edge, eliminating transaction disputes, because we get confirmations. Nowadays, we are making payments on these automated apps, Google Pay, etc. There is no question whether we have paid the money. We have the audit trail for that in our mobile, so we can show this payment has been made. So there is no dispute whether we have given 100 rupees note or 200 rupees note. That dispute is not there. So between corporates, between individuals, these transaction disputes will be minimized, though they will not be fully eliminated. This all will give us higher operational efficiency as well as agility and flexibility to our operations at the personal level or corporate level. Now, procurement process, also various automated functions have been used. I have listed only a very few here. There are much more in number. Now, companies has to send requests for quotation and call quotation. All this process has been automated, and the ERP system will select the vendors to whom the request for quotation is to be sent once purchase requisitions are in place. This process is fully automated by some of the companies. There are tools available for bid evaluation as well as supplier negotiations. So this process also tools are being used so that manual time which is required to be spent on these activities, it is getting reduced. Some companies have started using vendor relationship management model so that all these functions like preparing delivery challenge or posting purchase invoices, this is being done through that vendor relationship or customer relationship module. So the company, if they are procuring certain parts from company A, company A is not required to prepare their delivery challenge from ERP and physically send it to the company to whom they are selling the goods. This is being used in a large scale in automobile companies. They have given all their vendors this vendor relationship models, and they are all these activities of delivery challenge and purchase invoices posting. It is being handled by those vendors sitting in their office. So workload of the automobile companies is greatly reduced because of this vendor relationship models. So these are very few examples. I have not put a lot of examples here, but almost all the functions are getting automated like this. Now, procurement audit, what are the objectives? Objectives of internal audit have been discussed in the first session by Mr. Mukherjee. But what are the main objectives of procurement audit? First is identifying irregularities. Various irregularities may be taking place in procurement function, and it is internal auditor's job to identify such irregularities, find out the root cause of these irregularities, and suggest corrective actions so that these irregularities are avoided, not only minimized but totally avoided. There may be irregularity in, say, procuring parts, procuring products, negotiations, rate, so many aspects. So all these irregularities should be minimized. Maintain compliance with, first is with statutory requirements, maybe taxation and other requirements. There are so many other laws affecting. If you are buying chemicals, there are various laws, how you should buy chemicals, how you should store, how you should transport. Whether these laws have to be complied, and that is the function in procurement function. That is a requirement. Also, internal policies and procedures which have been documented by way of SOPs and other things, manuals, they are also required to be complied. And whether that is being done or not, it is internal auditor's role. So it is one of the objective of internal audit to ensure compliance with standard operating procedure introduced by the companies. Improving efficiency, that is also one of the important tasks so that cost can be reduced. So internal auditors have to suggest ways and means how efficiency of that function which they are auditing that can be increased, mainly by better use of computerized systems. Improve spending performance, that is cost. Cost cutting is always first preference given in any internal audit activity. So if internal auditor suggests certain measures so that cost of the procurement is reduced even by say 0.5%, that gives a lot of benefits to the company in case of financial terms. And such suggestions are always welcome by the companies. Streamline procurement workflows. There may be certain gaps in the workflow, in the process which is being followed for procurement, and it is duty of the internal auditor to suggest suggest improvement in this workflow. Avoidance of fraud and reducing the risk, that is also important part. Frauds cannot be stopped altogether, but there should be internal controls to avoid such frauds in the procurement function. Procurement, that is raw material consumption, is the cost which varies, say, from 40% to 60%, 70% of the revenue of the company is spent on raw materials consumption. So depending upon type of the activity. So avoiding the fraud in this function is very important from the company's, every corporate's perspective. Also, there are a lot of risks involved in procurement function, and how this risk can be minimized, that is one of the tasks given to the internal auditors. We'll discuss about some of the risk in the coming slide. So what are typical risk in the procurement function? Fictitious vendor creation. Though the company has instituted various processes and controls in vendor selection, vendor empanelment, it may happen that some fictitious vendors, the companies which are not existing at all, they are part of our vendor master and they have been empaneled, and certain transactions are being done with these companies. So this is one of the risks which is existing. And internal auditors have to keep an eye on this. Unauthorized vendor master modifications. This is also an important risk, because it happens that vendor master modification task is given to a particular group or a particular person, and he may delegate this to others for want of time, and certain modifications may take place in the vendor master which are not authorized. So there should be a proper process. The internal auditor has to see that such processes are meticulously followed, and there are no exceptions to this. Requests for quotation are sent to unapproved vendors, because our approved vendors sometimes is not in a position to supply the products or materials. Then whenever there is an urgency, unapproved vendor is contacted, and from him the materials are being procured. So whether this risk always exists. Unapproved purchase requisition or unapproved purchase orders. The company prepare delegation of authority matrix for approval of these transactions, but sometimes it may happen that unapproved transactions may remain in the system, and this risk is existing, and it is internal auditor's job to see how this risk is avoided. Unauthorized terms and conditions may be put in the purchase order. So it should be as per the company's policy regarding payment terms and delivery terms and other terms. These terms should be as per the company's policy. They should be authorized by appropriate authority. Unfavorable terms negotiated with vendors, mainly regarding payment terms. So they should not be in the they should be in the interest of the company. They should not be against the company's policy. Possible disputes with vendors. This is also a risk. Because of various factors, dispute may take place with the vendors, and it creates a headache for the company. So this risk, how to avoid, the internal auditors have to suggest measures. Delay in ordering materials leading to disruption in operations. This is the important part. Once MRP is run, or once order is received by the company, in case of a project company, proper planning has to be done for ordering the materials. And if that is not being done, it may result in delay in receiving materials and delay in production and execution of the order. So in project company, it is more important. Adherence to contract not ensured, leading to excess cost. So the contract terms are specified, but some of them are not followed, and which results in extra cost to the company by procuring materials at extra cost. Dealing with non-performing vendors. So vendor appraisal system is put in place by the companies, but still certain vendors may not be performing as expectations, and the company may have to continue dealing with these vendors. So this is the risk. Inactive vendor code exists in the system, in the master. So this is also a risk. The vendor is not responding and is not doing any business, but still is active, so that the buyer can place purchase order on this vendor anytime. So this risk has to be minimized or avoided. These are very few, and some of the risks. There is a long list. Procurement is a very vast function. Direct procurement, that is raw materials, procurement of services, procurement of other material, spend, like say printing, stationery, capex. This is a very vast function, and accordingly the risk register is also very large. Now coming to the audit of procurement function, as we discussed, three-way match was being done manually by taking the files of purchase orders, GRNs, and purchase invoices. That is the past now. That has been stopped long back, and all the ERPs are taking care of this three-way match properly. And exception list also is very available to the auditors. So internal auditors are not required to concentrate on this function, which was core activities say 25 years back. Now internal auditors can use data analytics with the use of Excel or other tools like say IDEA, ACL, etc., or other tools available in the market, and they do a lot of data analytics and provide a report to the management and give a lot of value addition to the management. If we take example of vendor master data, which is a core in the procurement function, vendor master as well as material masters, there can be a lot of data analytics work done by the auditors, and we can find a lot of exceptions, like multiple vendors with same contact details, PAN, GST, whether they are existing and whether they are authorized properly. There can be multiple vendors. One company may be allotted multiple codes as vendor, due to certain reasons, like say they are supplying from various states, various factories, and they are required to allot very different numbers. But this is important analysis is required to be done by internal auditors on regular basis. Duplicate vendors, unauthorized master changes, we discuss about that, and bank account changes are very sensitive because other changes, name of the contact person, etc., it is less important. But payment to the vendor will be done based on the bank account details which are incorporated in the vendor master. If that bank account details are getting changed, that has to be monitored by internal auditors regularly. Masters with faulty payment terms, because then payment may be made early or later to the vendor, and if it is being done later, he will always be complaining that he's getting the payment late. Missing master information like address, telephone, email, registration, etc. This can be a fraud prone area, that vendor has been registered and all these details are not available or not being incorporated. There can be some hanky-panky things. Similarly, in materials master, there can be duplicate material codes, and it happens in many companies because of negligence or because of lack of proper procedure. One material is allotted multiple codes, and it creates a lot of trouble in inventory management as well as procurement. Redundant material or item codes. Code has been created, but now it is not being used. It can happen, and proper action needs to be taken upon them. Unauthorized changes to material codes, that also should not happen. Similarly, data analytics can be used for various trend analysis of prices paid for each material during, say, particular period, maybe week. If the procurement is on higher level, this analysis can be done on weekly basis also. Some companies are doing that on daily basis also, with the use of robotics. I know some companies where this trend analysis is being performed on day-to-day basis. High-value materials procured from a single vendor. What is the reason? This is the area which can be looked into by internal auditors and taken up to the management if they found something wrong in this. Low value materials being procured through multiple POs. What is the reason? Because you can go for rate contracts for such low value materials instead of raising PO every week for such materials. Splitting of POs to circumvent approvals. Internal auditors can find out through data analytics of purchase orders data in electronic form that this practice is not being resorted to avoid approvals from the authorities. POs raised on holidays, on weekly offs. There should be a specific reason for this. Otherwise, they can be flagged by internal auditors and probed into. And vendors wherein POs are frequently amended for price or quantity. Auditors can find out the reason, and a proper control can be established here. POs open for 1 month beyond scheduled delivery dates. They can be identified, and reasons can be found out by the auditors, and whether there is anything going wrong in this. Backdating of POs. Normally, ERP does not allow backdating of POs, but if it is happening, then auditors can point out. So these are the certain functions in vendor masters, material masters, and day-to-day procurement which is happening, which can be analyzed by auditors with use of data analytics tool. Our Excel also facilitates a lot of these activities being done through Excel. So this was regarding data analytics for use of audit. So Vikashji, any questions?
Not pending. People are demanding for the presentation, sir, from all the faculties.
I will share. Share.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kulkarni sir. That was indeed a very knowledgeable session for us. Thank you for sparing time and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you all the participants. Have a nice Sunday ahead.
So for the concluding remarks and thanking note, Arun sir, hello.
Please do, sir.
Okay. So this brings us to the end of today's webinar. I would like to thank Internal Audit Standard Board, ICI, Sameer sir, Chairman of Bathinda Branch NIRC, Nanda sir, Josefa sir, Ankur sir, Prakash Kulkarni sir, the technical and the backend team, and all of you who have joined us for this webinar and being a patient listener. Thank you very much. Thank you all.